privilege and pleasure to introduce George Kraft. When Bill and I were scouting around to figure out what church to join back in 2003 when we came to Holland to retire, we started to go to the adult education class there. And about the second week we were there, George and his wife were teaching a class about hymns, gospel songs and hymns. And he married Robbie, who has a background and expertise in piano playing. And and of course, George, if you know him from Hope College, he's Mr. Sports. So theirs was a marriage of music and sport. George was born the son of missionary parents in China. He did his undergraduate work at Wheaton College, majoring in history. After spending 2 years as an infantry officer in the United States Army, he pursued graduate work at the University of Indiana, where he learned of Hope College and the college's plans to establish a physical education major and the need to enlarge the faculty. Dr. Kraft was a Hope College faculty member from 1967 until his retirement as a professor of kinesiology in 2005. He was the college's wrestling coach from 1967 to 1978 and was an assistant football coach from 1967 to 1997. He was chair of the Department of Kinesiology from 1988 to 2003. And while he was the department chair, the DeVos Fieldhouse was designed and built. And in 2013, the performance lab at the DeVos Fieldhouse was named in honor of Hope College educator and coach, Dr. George Kraft. Tell us about your book today, A Place to Call Home, a Missionary Kid's Tale. Okay, welcome, George Kraft.
Thanks, Judy. Yeah. Judy and Bill went back to China, didn't you, after you joined Hope Church for about 4 or 5 months? I knew you were there in China, and so, yeah, so Judy has been a friend for a long time. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for making time to come. And I'm a visual learner. David Myers had David Myers' presentation a couple of weeks ago. He said that they're starting to debunk the idea that there's different styles of learning. Remember, he said that. Well, he's going to have to prove it to me. I think I'm a visual learner. I think people learn kinesthetically, visually, through the auditory or through reading and writing, and I'm one who learns visually. So you're going to see a bunch of slides, because the slides are what bring back the memories to me. A picture's worth 1,000 words, or I think as a Viking that has better to see something once than read about it 1,000 times. That's kind of where I'm at. So you're going to have to put up with some slides here, and I'll be primarily using this screen here. Let's go to the very first slide, and we'll see if I can get this thing to work. Okay, I want to start, if I could, I'd like to start with a little bit of a geography historical lesson. This is Mark Cook, and some of you know Mark Cook. He's a fantastic cartographer. He does the best maps. There's really few people do better. This is the situation there at the height of what I'm calling the Sino-Japanese War. We call it the Second World War. Sino means China, Chinese-Japanese War. It actually, Japan swept into China they started sweeping into Northeast China around July of 1937. So it actually was about 2 years before Hitler started advancing into Poland. So this war Second World War actually started a couple of years earlier in China. And these are just some of the spots I want to highlight here. If I can find, oops, I got the wrong one. I was trying to hit the laser printer here. Here's Japan. There's Korea. I want you to remember this is Shantung province. Okay, right there. Here's Peking, which is now called Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong. Of course, there's Taiwan. There's Lhasa, Tibet, the capital of Tibet. I was born in Chengdu, China, right there. Wife and I visited the Three Gorges Dam along. Here's the Yangtze River starting in Himalayan mountains and working its way to Shanghai. And there you can see, we talk a little bit more about Burma, which is now called Myanmar, which is a very important part of the history of the Second World War in China. So you might keep that in your mind. Kalimpong, this is interesting. When the mission schools in China, when we had to leave, they were forced to go over this hump, and we'll talk about later in Burma. They established the schools during the Second World War in Kalimpong, India, which is right there. We've got the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean. So that's just sort of the situation there in China. Just a couple of interesting things here. A lot of you know David and Carol Myers right here in town. Carol's maiden name was Petterkin, and her dad was Major Petterkin, and he was in charge of the Dixie Brigade. And the Dixie Brigade was here in Southwest China in what's called Nationalist or Free China. And he was in charge of this group of about 50, 60 men. And it was their responsibility to sort of probe the Japanese lines and to sort of provide feedback for the American Army headquarters. And so it's kind of interesting we have that connection with Carol. She's put his diary together, gave me a copy. I don't know if she still has any copies left, but if you're interested, it's very interesting to really read through the book. There was one where they had a picture of him wanted dead or alive, Colonel Petterkin. Thought I was reading something from a saloon and a billboard and out west about 100 years ago or something. So if you see Carol Myers, you might want to talk to her about that. So anyway, that's sort of the situation there in China at that Second World War. Any thoughts or comments on that one? This is just a little. This is a close up. Why Hudson? I'll talk about Hudson Taylor, the founder of the mission. He decided to put the mission school way up here in Chifu, China. This is a Shandong compound, and it's called the China Inland Mission because the missionaries were primarily in inland China. So not quite sure why, because from where my parents were missionaries on the border of Tibet, it would take over a month to get from there to Chifu. So kind of I don't know why he established the mission up there. That's where he did establish the first mission school. I went to school after the Second World War in a place called Guling, one of the most beautiful places on earth. Right here, here's Poyang Lake, and here's Guling, here's Wuhan that we've all heard about because of that epidemic of the Yangtze River coming through. Taiwan, for most of my parents went back to Taiwan where they went to Taiwan for 20 years as missionaries after they were forced to leave China in 1951. This is a nice picture on the deck of the Hien Maro just before leaving Vancouver. This would have been in October of 1934. And this is a group of 4 ladies here. And a little connection here for Holland. Does the name Grace Liddell Cox ring a bell? Many of you know John Cox, right? His mother, Grace Liddell, this is this lady right here. So John's mom and my mom went to China on the very same ship. And just this is important, and so I want to make a point here. This is two graces and 2 pearls. All college graduates, okay? The vast majority of the missionaries that went to China under the China Inland Mission were educated single women, which I find interesting. My father did not have a college degree. My mother had a degree from the University of Minnesota in literature. In fact, she was a Shakespearean. Shakespeare was her specialty. And so in my parents' mission, that was just the case. Not so much, I don't think, in Reformed Church and Christian Reformed Church missions, but this was a faith mission. And I'll talk a little bit more about faith missions versus denominational missions later. But they're all college educated. I've wondered, what was the motivation? Well, back between the world wars, if you were a high school graduate, you could be a stenographer, a secretary, or a switchboard operator. If you were a college graduate, you could be what? A teacher or a nurse. But if you're an evangelical Christian, there was a higher calling, and that was to be a missionary. You know, it was almost, I can remember my parents would come home on furlough, and my mother would be in deputation work talking. It was almost like an awe. Here's a woman that was willing to leave family, was willing to leave friends, willing to leave Minneapolis, Minnesota, go to China to be a missionary. In fact, if you don't mind, there's a little song about that, and I'll give you some response. Remember this one? So send I you to labor unrewarded, to serve unpaid, unloved, unsought, unknown, to bear rebuke, to suffer scorn and scoffing. So send I you to toil for me alone. As the Father has sent me, so send I you. You remember that? My dad thought that gospel song was a crock of baloney, or to use vernacular, BS. The life of a missionary was the most exciting, dynamic, vibrant, challenging life that anybody could possibly have. And my dad was a religious zealot and an adventurer, loved adventure. So the line of Tibetan border was perfect for him to enjoy both of those passions of his life. Those were more passions for him than his children. That's certainly true. However, for my mother, and you'll discover this as you go along, I think there's maybe more of an element of truth to that particular gospel song than you might readily realize. And that'll become apparent, I think, as we go along. This is one different lady here, but this is a group, Grace, Pearl, and Grace. This is the Hudson Taylor, the founder of the mission, liked people to dress in the foreign garb. So there they are in their Chinese gowns. And that was in language school. He had 6 months training in language school. And then from there you went, there's mom in language school in 35. After you've had gone to language school for 6 months, they then put you with a senior missionary who would sort of help you in the ways of the culture. And you still continue to have a private Chinese tutor. This was Lois Muller with Grace Galloway and Pearl Galloway and my mother there in Shaanxi province in northwest China. Here's my dad. He left for China. My mom went in November of 34. My dad left in October of 35. They did know each other in Minneapolis before, but they hadn't really dated. My mother was 7 years older than my father, so they weren't in the same, quite the same age bracket. But he hasn't gotten into his Chinese garb yet. He must have just purchased all of its books, getting ready for language school. When you see this, my dad was like I said, he went to Northwest. It was called Northwestern Missionary and Bible Training Institute. It was in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's now called the University of Northwestern. We play them in they got a good volleyball program. And but anyway, it was the Northwestern Missionary and Bible Training Institute when he went there for 3 years before he went to China. There they are meeting in Shaanxi province. Dad went to visit mom and proposed to her. My dad was 6'4", 225 pounds, which is a pretty good sized man for that time, and extremely good athlete, strong, not an ounce of body fat on him. I wish I'd had his size, but a very good athlete. And particularly interesting enough, my friend John Patnot's here. It was a dive. His special skill was diving, so he wasn't just physically powerful, but he also was very agile. He could do all the Olympic dives, get on the 3 meter platform and do the reverse dives, the 1.5 in the tuck position, the 1.5 in the pike position, half gaiters, all of that. He just had really was very good. So just an extremely gifted athlete. There they are on their wedding day, September 14th, 1938. I came along on November 14th, 1939. So there they are on their wedding day. That wedding dress is used by more than one bride in China. They'd be passed around. So, and there they are at the wedding party. Chengdu even then was a fairly large city in China. So there were a number of missionaries that were stationed in Chengdu. And here they are. This is just before I'd been born. This is just before they're leaving to go up to their posting, which was in Kongding. And so they're getting ready for that. Is that the way you got weighed when you were little? Maybe that's their dad weighing me with his improvised scale in Western Sichuan province. Interesting. I was born, like I said, in November of 39. And so they waited 6 months. It's a very rugged trip to get from Chengdu up to Kangding, where they were assigned us. Kangding is the gateway city to Tibet. Pretty much everything going to Tibet flows through the town of Kangding. And that was their assignment. And the China Tea Trail, everybody's heard of the Silk Road, but I tell you, the China Tea Trail is a very interesting story in and of itself. And the history of these are the porters carrying that's tea on their backs, and they would take China. The Tibetans needed a warm drink. They had snow melt, they had yak milk, goat milk, and kind of a barley beer, but they needed something hot and refreshing. And you obviously couldn't grow tea on the plateaus of Tibet at 13,000 feet. So the Chinese, these porters would bring the tea up. They say that Yunnan and Sichuan province are probably the first places that recorded actually having green tea. And so these porters then would take this tea up, and I've read some stories about this. You can see the posts on the back here, behind them. As they would climb from Chengdu, which is closer to sea level, go to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 feet. They would just walk this trail, and it took you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, lean on your pole and rest. Do that all day long. And as you got higher and higher, they go slower and slower. But to get the tea up to Kangding, then when they get to Kangding, they would be loaded on mules or yak and taken into Lhasa and into the inland areas of Tibet. I've often wondered why you didn't have even the sturdy, and I'll show you even the sturdy Tibetan horses called the Nangchen, Nangchen, they couldn't traverse these trails. Plus there were rope bridges, and obviously a horse can't go across a rope bridge because that's what the bridges were at that time. But this tea trade started around, I had the date here, it's around the year 1000, maybe 800 AD. And by the year about 1450, around the 14th, 15th century, they were taking millions of pounds of tea to Tibet. And what did the Tibetans give in return? They gave them these sturdy horses called the Nangchen, and the Chinese needed those in their constant warring with the warriors that would come down from the north of Manchuria. So they needed the horses. The Tibetans desperately wanted the hot tea. So this became the Tea Horse Road, or the China Tea Trail, but very treacherous. I mean, it took to go from Chengdu to Kangding was about a 12 to 14 days to make that trip. You had to go up over mountain passes. Dad said there were times you would almost have to slide down on your bottom just to actually get down to the bottom, just an extremely dangerous and challenging trail. So that Tea Horse Road, and of course, tea would go on up to the Silk Road. And tea, it wasn't just silk on the Silk Road or silk roads. One of the other products they did bring over was a lot of green tea as well. Here is this I showed this. This is a picture my dad took. This is a swaying rope bridge over the Dadu River. You pretty much, if you were going to get from China to Tibet, you pretty much had to go over this. The majority of the traffic would be over this rope bridge. And my mother was never comfortable. And this is the Cadillac of bridges. So over some of the other rivers, my mother was very fearful of heights. And some of those bridges were just like 3 ropes and a couple ropes to hold on to as you walked across. And my dad really would probably have to carry my mother literally over some of those bridges. But that was the key one there at a juncture there on the Dadu River, which sort of separates Tibet and China. When my parents were there, the demarcation between when were you in Tibet or when were you in China, you didn't really know. I don't think the Tibetans and the Chinese, it wasn't like there was a clear divide. So Dad talks a lot about being in Tibetan country or being in Chinese country in this ministry, because where was the border? Wasn't that clear? Let's take a look at this. If you haven't done this, just when you get home, Google transportation China. Unbelievable. I mean, this is nothing compared to what China has done. They've got 20-mile long bridges that they've got highways that are just on stilts, hundreds of yards in the air that go around mountain passes. It just, the infrastructure of China is just incredible. But anyway, the bridge you just saw was right across here. So you had to work your way down the mountains to here. Then you get here and you work your way up over the top and back down again. Now they have this bridge comes in off of a tunnel, goes into a tunnel, and on this end, 12 miles later, on the divided highway, you come out the other end of the mountain. It's over a mile, in this case, a mile below the surface of the top of the mountain in some spots. So what it took my parents 4 or 5 days to do this particular part of the trip, you're now doing 15 minutes. I mean, it's just a totally different world. So that's one of the bridges, but just Google it up. You'd be amazed at some of the architecture there, things that they've done as far as transportation in China. This is a picture of my dad preaching. This is the little church that was right by their compound. Must have been wintertime. Dad's got a pretty warm jacket on there. They're listening to my father. My father was a linguistic genius. In order to document that, I brought along a little. My dad had to leave China when he was 40 years old, so he left China when he was 40. Okay, so he really didn't have contact with the Tibetans after he was 40. When he was my age in his 80s, he wrote the Tibetan primer that is now used by virtually every single Westerner that goes to Eastern China. There are 3 basic dialects in Tibetan. One's Kam. Incredible. I mean, after 40 years in his 80s, and he writes this Tibetan primer. And we found out about when my brother and I visited Tibet in 2012. We were talking to people. They said, "Oh, sure, everybody here is learning to speak the Kam dialect Tibetan using this book and the tapes that accompany the book." So it was my dad spoke fluent. He spoke fluent Sichuanese. Okay, in the western part of China, Mandarin wasn't the language; it was Sichuanese, and it's quite different than Mandarin. So he spoke fluent Sichuanese and fluent Kam. There's no Westerner ever that's spoken both those languages and written Tibetan and Chinese better than my father. Just an extremely, just kind of a natural linguist. But so it was kind of interesting for brother me to realize that they all were learning Tibetan through the book that my dad had written. So, and it's right. Anyway, that's Dad preaching, and he interesting. My dad, he was a bit, like I said, 6'4", 225. And one of the contests that the muleteers would have up in Tibet would be to see who could throw most of those bags of tea. When they got to Kongding, they'd put them in larger bags and put them on mules and take them into Lhasa and interior Tibet. Well, as the muleteers were in their caravan stops, they would demonstrate their strength by seeing who could throw the most bags of tea. They're weighed about 80 pounds on top of each other. Well, the strongest Tibetans could do 18. My dad could, with fairly good ease, do 23. So the reputation of this crazy foreigner who spoke our language pretty well and had stories about this strange religion, sort of, you know how stories gather around fireplaces. And so my dad was always welcome. They want to hear his stories about whatever. And then, of course, that gave my dad the entree to share the message of the gospel, which is why he was there. And then this is a small little chapel right by where they lived up in Kongding. I thought I would just veer a moment here And I don't want to talk about, I don't know that much about Buddhism. And we've got Boyd Wilson here. Boyd knows more than I could even begin to know about Buddhism. But maybe even for Boyd, I just want to mention a couple of things about Tibetan Buddhism, which is called Lamaism, Lamaism. A lama is a priest. That's the name for priest. And this right here, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. This is Om Mani Padme Hum. That's sort of a mantra. And you say, what the Westerners, this, I took this from an airplane, speaking about getting from Chengdu to Kongding. I said it took 15 minutes now to do that, 4 days. It took about 12 days, 12 or 13 days to get from Chengdu up to Kongding, up the China Tea Trail. The last time my brother and I were there, airplane, 45 minutes. Plane landed 14,000 feet in this gorgeous airport. First thing we saw when we got off the airplane was oxygen bar in English, to the right. So I understand it's the second highest airport in the world. But anyway, blazoned on the hillside, there was a Mani Padme Hum. And, what does it mean? Well, it's sort of, as Westerners, we always want specific answers to exactly what does this mean. Well, in Eastern thought, that's not really the point. Okay, the point is anyway, but if you wanted a little interpretation, if you want to go just word for word, I wrote it down here. Om is just a sacred symbol. Mani would stand for jewel. Padme would be the lotus flower, and Hum would be the spirit of enlightenment. So around that, of course, Tibetan scholars have generated a lot of explanations. But you will see, I'll just show that here, that Om Mani Padme Hum will be written out in China billions and billions of times, and they'll be in these huge prayer wheels. These are prayer wheels in Tibet. And that's not the only mantra. It's far and away the most popular mantra in Tibet. But you've got handheld wheels. I have one of those that you can spin, or in the temples, you'll have these huge, and those would be just filled with pieces of paper that say Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. So as you spin those cylinders, those prayers then waft up into the heavens. And those prayer wheels I've seen prayer wheels that are driven by water. A waterfall actually spins the wheel, air spinning the wheels, or turning them by hand as you do in these particular prayer wheels. The Potala Palace in Lhasa. Lhasa is the capital of Tibet, and that's quite a feat, really, because it's in godforsaken nowhere. Believe me, Lhasa is just way in central Tibet, and you can see the mountains there in the background. They built this palace, and this is a palace for the Dalai Lama, which is a unique aspect of Tibetan Buddhism. They have a Dalai Lama, and he lived at the Potala Palace, the Dalai Lama, since about I think the first Dalai Lama was 1390. Since then, there's been a Dalai Lama. We got the 14th Dalai Lama right now, and they would be both the spiritual and the secular head of state. Absolutely, the both in one. And he would be secular leader of Tibet. But as you probably know, in 1958, China swept through, communism swept through China with Mao in 48 and 49, 50. But it was about 58 that they really, with all the road structures that they established, they were basically able to sweep through Tibet, and the Dalai Lama was forced to leave and go to India. Here is the current 14th Dalai Lama. He was selected in 1935. His name was Lhamdo Donthorpe. He's been renamed Tenzin Gyatso, kind of like the popes. They rename the Dalai Lama, and that's his name. And he's also called His Holiness. You've probably seen that picture. He lives in northern India. And what's going to happen to Lamaism? I don't know. Maybe Boyd knows a little more than I do about that, but he has said that maybe he will appoint the next Dalai Lama before he dies, which would, of course, be a there would be no reincarnation. I'm going to read a little section if I could on how he was chosen through reincarnation. That wouldn't fly. The Communist Party has volunteered to appoint the next Dalai Lama. Now that would go over like a lead balloon. Yeah, Boyd, you want to make a comment here? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Oh, China passed a law forbidding reincarnation without permission from the government.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Well said, well said. Okay, so what's the future of Lama I think the future of the Dalai Lama, I think, wouldn't you agree? It's up. We just don't know. He's 89 years old, so he's going to be passing away shortly. And whether there'll be another Dalai Lama or not, I don't really know. It's just time will tell on that one. And this is also taken from the airplane. They also have there's valleys just all over Tibet. They're just covered with these prayer flags, just prayer flags, just the whole thing. Just I sometimes look and just see valleys, just nothing but prayer flags that waft in the breeze. And as the breezes blow, the prayers can ascend. I talked to my dad with muleteers here. The caravan stops. They stop along the way. Here's Dad preaching to a group, and you can see I'm sorry, keep pressing the wrong button here. You can see the bales of hay up along the wall there. That's piling the bales of hay, getting ready to put on the caravans heading into interior of Tibet. Those would be the ones that my dad could throw 23 on top of each other. They could do about. So anyway, that's my dad there. This is, my parents went to China, like I said, in 40, was it 45 and 46? And I'm sorry, 34 and 35. And so around they'd been in China around just before right in the middle of the Second World War, when I was about 2 years old. So it'd been about 1941. 1940, Dad thought it was about time that our family get back to Minneapolis, Minnesota. Needed a sabbatical or a furlough. And since the Japanese basically controlled the entire east coast of China, the only way to get out of China, period, was to go what's called over the hump, which is over the Himalayan mountains, to go from Kunming in southwest China to Calcutta in India. And these were the refurbished Douglas 47s. These are the airplane that we flew in. So my dad, in the middle of winter in 1941, I'm 18 months old, my brother's 6 months old, middle of winter, up in there, just the weather the way it is. My dad says, it's time. Now we need to go down to Chengdu and try to work our way back to the United States. That trip, I wasn't old enough to remember, but I've got it in the book that I've written, which, oh, by the way, I'll put a copy of my book. Just give a copy here to the library. And if you want to be first come, first serve in terms of reading the book, decided it was time, and just he shared the story. I've got it in the book of coming down in the middle of winter. Crazy. I mean, the inns that you stayed in, they had the flaps on the sides. Some of them had no sides on them at all, just have a little foot on the top. It was quite a venture. But anyway, finally you worked your way to Kunming, and I know it was on my third birthday, November 14th, 1939, that our converted Douglas C-47 took off from Kunming on its way to get to India. And so anyway, this Mark Cook did this here. Mark, this is Mark's creation. This map does not exist except for Mark. I always thought that we just kind of went from Kunming straight over Japanese-held Burma to Calcutta. Mark assures me after his research that no, everybody went from Kunming to Dinjan. That's where you mechanics would check your plane out to make sure it was still in workable order. And then from Dinjan, you'd work your way down then to Calcutta. So that was the first leg of the trip. And I might just share something if I can find it in my book quickly here about that. This is the Burma Road was constructed in 1938 and was the principal supply route from Burma, Myanmar to southwest China. When Japan captured the road, U.S. airmen were forced to fly hundreds of missions over the hump. The hump flight over the Himalayan mountains was a pioneering aviation operation that had just about everything working against it. Foreboding mountains, terrible weather most of the time, Japanese fighter planes, crude navigation instrument, night flights, unproven aircraft, and inexperienced flight and maintenance crews. Military commanders considered flight over the hump more hazardous than a bombing mission over Europe. More than 1,300 planes and pilot and crew members were lost. Over 500 planes crashed, but we made it. I think my dad was a little foolhardy, really, trying that trip right in the middle of the Second World War. In fact, they say that 1 out of 3 pilots lost their life trying to fly that hump, going over there. And so from there, we then took there's a train that runs from Calcutta to Bombay, which is now called Mumbai. And Dad negotiated then, and we got on a freighter that went down the Indian Ocean and around the Cape of Good Hope to Cape Town, South Africa. So we were there, and then from there, Dad had to negotiate again to try to get back to Minneapolis. So from there, then we took it and we went on the South Atlantic all the way to Buenos Aires in Argentina. And Dad told me we took an Argentinian vessels and say we're a neutral country in the Second World War, a little bit safer from getting torpedoed, and arrived in Buenos Aires. And then they told Dad he was going to have to go around the Cape Horn here. And that can be a pretty rough voyage when you go around, particularly 80, 90 years ago. Robbie and I, my wife and I have taken that. Fortunately, we went around, it was smooth as silk, but the ship that we were on before it did it, they couldn't eat on, they couldn't serve meals on the tables because plates and silver would go everywhere. But anyway, so from there, over the Andes Mountains, down to Santiago, Chile. There was a wonderful Roman Catholic priest there who took our family in for a few months while Dad was able to finally make the final negotiations for going up through the Panama Canal to Havana, and then from there to New Orleans, and then from there to Minneapolis. When we arrived, it was a 6-month trip. When we arrived in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis Tribune and the Minneapolis Star were there. We don't want to know about this what is with this strange couple trying to come back from China in the middle of the Second World War? And that's me. That's, of course, my brother, my mother there. You can try to read what you read in the faces, that one there. So my parents came back then, that was in May of 43. And of course, my dad was so anxious to get back to Tibet and China. I mean, he just chomping at the bit, wanting to get back. And the armistice with Japan was signed on September 2, 1945. Hirohito went on the radio and announced the surrender on August 15th, but it was technically signed in Tokyo Bay on the USS Missouri on September 2 of 45. So in November of 45, my dad we're ready to head back. So he's takes us and we head back to China, and we land in Shanghai. And the school, like I said, had to move. They were worried that the Japanese were going to take all of China. So the school had moved they'd gone over the hump and gone to that place of Kalimpong that I showed you, in the northern part of India. The school hadn't come back yet. And it didn't really know exactly when the school was going to come back. So we arrived in Shanghai. Very few Westerners were there. Back after the war, China was kind of in ruins. And so what to do? Well, my dad had to get back up to Tibet. I mean, that was God's calling. So there was a German family older couple living in Shanghai that I found out later were German sympathizers, didn't speak a word of English. So my dad, and I say my dad made the decisions. And anyway, I went to live with this German family for 6 months. And I do remember that as being one of the tougher times in my life, that 6 months of being, mainly because I wasn't with other kids. I mean, I'm an extrovert at heart. I gained energy from being with people. I'm starting to slow down now a little bit. I got a few challenges, but anyway, that was so being alone, you know, 6 months with no other kids to play with. That was tough. And I do remember that as being kind of a tough time for me. I was 6. I turned 6. I turned 6 in November. And I remember on Christmas Day, right after I turned 6, I think it was December 26th, they left. And I can remember the Chinese top they gave me. And of course, my brother was 4.5. So that he went up into Tibet with the family, and I stayed there in Shanghai waiting for the school to come back. It finally came the next summer. So I was there for about 6 months. And, you know, next week, I'm going to get more into my personal story. Okay. So if you come back, if you don't mind, I will share a little bit more of the personal aspect. And missionary, you're a missionary kid, right? I welcome. Do we have any other missionary kids here? You know, maybe Malcolm, you know, any reactions you might have, but I'll get a little more personal next time in the story. I'm staying a little more academic today. But that was tough. And, but who was it? Was it tougher on me, or was it tougher on my mother? Tougher on my mother, I think, really. Just see if I can find it here. Let's see here. Whereas Dad seemed reconciled to leaving me in Shanghai, it was more difficult for Mom. But she consoled herself with the promise of Scripture. Mom shared her heartache with this brief narrative in a prayer letter. She wrote about a night on a long trip to Kongding after leaving me in Shanghai. 4-year-old Dick had awoken during the night saying, "I'm tired, I'm dirty, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, and I wish I was back in Minneapolis." She soothed him, but then went on to say, "And Mama, we left our precious George in Shanghai, an American boy in China, living with a German family and attending a British school. The Chandler mission was thoroughly British." But then Mom always did this. She would sort of almost justify her actions by referring to Scripture. Okay, and this was, "There is no man that have left children for my sake and the Gospels, but he shall receive 100-fold. We're claiming children from among the Tibetans. Pray with us." And then Don Leiden's comment here, my editor, "The sacrifice of leaving her son behind was well worth the claiming of young Tibetan lives from eternal damnation." But then I said, "However, I was a miserable 6-year-old, I had no playmates, no family." So I was obviously pretty miserable. Here is the founder of the China mission, a man by the name of Hudson Taylor. Did we get those handouts to people here? Maybe she was going to get those. I've got some handouts, and there's the book called Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret. If you could pass both of those out, Judy, would be good. Okay. He's the founder of the mission. He was in Brighton Beach in southern England in 1865. And he heard God's call saying, "Hudson, I want you to take missionaries to inland China." Up until that time, the Reformed Church and the Christian Reformed Church and the Presbyterian Church had a presence along the coast in China, but not really many missionaries in inland China. And if you want to read a book about it, just it was a faith mission. So you went out on faith, believing that God would provide. And no missionary could ask for money. You could present the need, but God would then prick the person's heart to contribute. And so Hudson would go around England sharing the need. And that was 1965. 20 years later, at 85, 240 missionaries in inland China. And who was responsible for their financial well-being? Hudson Taylor. And he's got a book called Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret. I read that book and I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Some of the stories in there about how God would provide. I mean, he'd be down to literally his last farthing. He couldn't even pay to get on a bus to get back home. And then somehow a businessman would feel God's call to provide £1,000 and it would show up in his mailbox. I mean, it's quite a story. If you want to read about him, you can do that first book that's mentioned there. A little bit about Tibet here. This was interesting. They left me, like I said, I was left in China in the Christmas of 1945. Well, in 46, they decided I was going to try to get me back up to Tibet. So it was a 1-month trip one way, 3 weeks one way. Missionaries helped me along the way to get there, up the China Tea Trail, which I talked about, 1 week with my parents, and then 3 weeks back. So I saw my parents twice for the 5 years that I was in China. I mean, it was just too far. They were just missionaries too far away. So for the Christmases, 2 Christmases, I spent them with some missionaries that lived closer to the mission school. Another Christmas, I lived right at the mission school with some of the children that couldn't get home. And I remember that Christmas as being kind of a lot of fun. But anyway, I did get back for 1 week. This is a picture of Dad with some of the Tibetans there. Might just mention, I brought along a, I don't even know where, Dad must have bought this in Tibet. I don't know. This is a sort of a rendition of a llama. Okay. I mean, and they couldn't, China would be, this animal is absolutely essential to life in China. You can see there that these Tibetans wear the skin inside out. So the furry parts to the skin and the skin's on the outside. Those skins also provide the covering for their tents, the nomadic dwellings that they live in. It would be their tents. The meat, of course, was eaten. The dung became very important for burning in the wintertime. Dung was their fuel to burn in the wintertime. And then even some of the fat was turned into candle wax. So virtually and I was thinking, what part wasn't used? Well, maybe the bones, but they probably gave the bones to the Tibetan mastiffs, these big, huge Tibetan dogs that all these people had. So pretty much everything in this animal is absolutely essential to life. I mean, I said llama, I meant yak. You know, the yak, sorry about that, is essential to life in China. And so there was some Dad with some Tibetans there. And just a little story there. And you're getting a sense of my mother and my father. When my brother was there, he said one time he came to the house, he said, I smell Tibetan. And the only person in this house that likes the smell of Tibetan is Daddy. That was probably a lot of truth to that. You know, my dad loved getting on horseback, sweeping out with some of these nomads and getting into their tents, staying within their tents. That was, for my dad, that was kind of living. There's a picture of us there. This is this Nongchen horse that I was talking about. This is what the Chinese got in trade for their green tea. It's a smaller horse. Over the centuries, it could adapt to living at 12, 14,000 feet. And it was sturdy, sure-footed animal and became very important, like I said, to the Chinese and their wars against Genghis Khan and the Mongols coming down from the north. They would augment the Great Wall as a part of their army up there. And my wife and I have been to Xi'an and have seen the Xi'an warriors. And of course, but there's also a lot of these horses they've unearthed, and you can see some of these horses there in Xi'an as well. Here was the school was in, like I said, I went back to Shanghai, and I've got about 5 more minutes before I promised I'd start to show a video. But the school opened, the school went from Shanghai to Guilin. This is a plane we all boarded on. And I tell you what, to go from Shanghai to Guilin was like going from a war-torn city to one of the most beautiful places on earth. And I'll, if you don't believe me, I'll document that. Who do you think who do you think had summer homes in Guling, China, where I went to school, the valley? It was a valley of about maybe 6 feet by 2 mountainsides on each side. Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong had the summer home. They had the same summer home. In fact, Mao had it. It was built for Mao, and then built for Chiang Kai-shek, and then when he left, Mao took over the same villa. But it was that kind of a place. And in fact, I think I've got a quote here. So we went from Shanghai to this. I wanted to quote it exactly. Okay, Guling, 170 peaks, 20 valleys, 16 mountain streams, 22 waterfalls, 3,000 varieties of plant life, 2,000 specimens of insects, and 170 varieties of birds and 22 different types of animals. I mean, we went to heaven. I mean, you can imagine what us kids thought going from Shanghai to Guling. Was like, oh my gosh. And I said I was a visual learner. And it's just thinking this, I was 11 years old when I left Guling schools. I don't remember ever being in a classroom once. That's strange. I don't remember being at church on Sunday morning. Obviously we were. Selective memory. But I have all kinds of memories. Out with my butterfly net, catching butterflies, getting insects, putting the insects, you all did it, putting the insects up on boards, and identifying the insect leaves. I mean, there were trees. How many different varieties of trees? We think of the ginkgo when we think of China. Believe me, there's all kinds of trees. And so we gather the leaves and identify them all. And it was just wonderful, you can imagine. So there we are, all aboard. There is the school. That's where I went to school there. This is McCarthy House, Bruce House, Conway House here lower. And this is the first level. There were a lot of classrooms. The boys were on the second level here. The girls were on the third level. So I wasn't a particularly very strong student. My dad, when we got to China, had a semester of kindergarten in the States. So they asked my father, finally, when the school arrived in Shanghai, where's your son academically? So he said first grade, put him in second grade. So I was put in second grade. I didn't know what was going on. I was completely lost. And I just said, forget it. I said, I can sing. I know I can sing, and I know I can play sports. So I did the things I could do well, which were those two, and just kind of gave up on the academics. They held me back a year. And which helped is when I was later in high school, I was a year older than most kids, so I matured a little bit, and I matured quickly, so it helped me in sports. But anyway, this is the school. I'll stop with this slide right here, Judy, before you help me I think I can get back to the presentation. But Mark Cook deserves a medal for this map. I'm very proud of this map. Mark can be proud of it too. This map doesn't exist anywhere except Mark created it. This is the school. This is where I was for 3 years, 8 through 10 years of age. And Mark did more research. I did more because I wanted a map of what it looked like from 1948 to 1950 when I was there. And this is the map. Okay. There is Chiang Kai-shek's home, Villa, which became Mao's home. The Church of the Ascension were worshipped on Sunday. Don't have 1 second's memory of ever being in that church, but I was there every Sunday morning. Here's the Chifu School, Chinese University was there, and just wonderful places. The Three Gorges Dam. I'll show you some pictures next time of Junction Pool. I mean, it was just one of the most beautiful places on earth, really. And I've got a few pictures to document and show on that. The only way you could get to Guling was on a 10-mile trail going up to Guling. There were no bicycles and obviously no automobiles. It was all foot. Okay, so because it was too steep to get up there. And here's the Yangtze River. Here's Poyang Lake, which I understand is the largest lake in China. There's It's on the Lushan. Shan in China means mountain. So it's on Lu Mountain. So Kunming is part of the Lu Mountain. I think I'm gonna, let's see, it's 2 o'clock. I'm gonna stop there. I want to segue. I'll come back to this next week with a little more personal side to it. But I want to segue in preparation for next week into looking at missionary kids and some of the struggles that some of my friends have had and that I went through a little bit too, I guess, being separated with my parents when they finally left China, went back to Taiwan. I saw them every 4 years. So I saw them when I was in 7th grade, 11th grade, junior in college, 2 years after college, 4 years after college, 10 years after college. That was just the way it was. And take my word for it, my mother almost didn't make it through some of those separations. I have a trailer, a 10-year-old, a sister who's 10 years younger than me. When my mother had to leave her, she had to leave her in Wheaton, Illinois when she was 10 years old, because that was a policy of the mission. At 10, you left your parents and you went to live in a mission home, either in England or New Zealand or a place like that. Really tough for my mother, but we'll get into that next time. But I want to segue into that with a friend of mine, Rhoda. He didn't go to school, and he went to the Chifu schools. And anywhere the mission was, they called it the Chifu schools, even though it was no longer in Chifu. But Chifu was a style of education, British education, that they were very proud of. And so wherever you were, whether it was in Kalimpong or Guling or wherever it was, they moved into the Cameron Highlands in Malaysia. It was called the Chifu schools. And this Richard Lane wrote this piece and performs this piece. I got the words for you there in case you have trouble hearing them. You can read through those. And so I'll show you this before we open it up for questions. I think I can get this back, Judy. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Get that thing going. It's kind of, I'm sure personally, yeah, the first time I heard this, I broke down and wept. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. It's powerfully presented. Uh, Help. It was right on that thing that had a little arrow right in the middle of it. Huh. Just go to the next slide. I think you got it. Huh. I think you just click on it. Yeah. It starts very softly. I didn't even think it was on, but it'll get a little louder. The crickets, it'll get louder, but you might, if you can turn it up a little bit, I don't know. I think it gets louder, Judy. It's just very quiet with the crickets to begin with. Let's just see. We'll see. If not, we'll get help. Okay. Pretty soft though. Yeah, you might see if you can get.
They took him to a railway station. They packed him up on board. They sent him up a mountain jungle in the name of our dear Lord. The pain and separation killed him. It took away the years. It took away his innocence and replaced it with those fears. They took her on a taxi ride around near 500 twigs. Oh, a boy, I'm soul would melt within like tears of jungle mist. The pain and separation killed her. It took away the years. It took away her innocence and replaced it with those fears. Just when it from the times from the stars and streams and fibers, I can and the skies would stop, the stars and lights of the unknown. And we came to down the winds of promises as the They took them to the airport. They packed them on a plane. When they threw them the dog, you got dressed, but it was all God's great name. Be the separation, redemption, and took away the years. It took away their innocence and replaced them with those fears. But people just went from the tigers in the grass, from the storms and schemes and firebirds. I'm from the sea, and the skies we shot, the stars and lights of the unknown lights on God. And we came to the winds of love and silence, as the blood of God. From the tigers from the storms and schemes to the firebirds. From the skies we shine, the stars and lights of the unknown hearts of God. And we came to the winds of promises. And the God of all.
Chief who? This is in the Cameron Highlands in Malaysia. The school went after China. I mulled over that last line quite a bit. Chief who kept us safe, chief who kept us warm. And I finally decided that the story is in the ... after that line. And we'll look at that a little bit more closely next time. Maybe chief who kept us safe, but ... This is an article that appeared in the Christianity Today on December 13th, 2022 issue. This is a mission school complex in Hillcrest, Africa, where there is absolute control over a person's life, especially children, and there's very little oversight, very little checks and balances, and where children are an afterthought and an inconvenience. What you have just now created is an absolutely flawless, perfect breeding ground for abuse of every shape and form and flavor. And mission schools are the textbook examples of this exact thing. That's sobering. and unfortunately, in far too many cases, true.
You want to take center stage here,
yeah, I will.
George?
Yep.
There may be some people that have been reluctant to raise their hand immediately, within
Sure, sure.
the
We'll take-
narrative itself.
No
Anything
problem.
that still comes to mind that you want to ask him about any of the questions that okay, here we go in the back here. The slideshow has disappeared at this
Sure.
point. We'll just do ad lib.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
We got one in the back and then I'll get to you.
I'm a little bit hard of hearing, so
Okay,
slowly,
okay.
clearly.
I have two questions. First of all, I'm wondering if these tea carriers
Yeah.
got reimbursed for walking that far, 14 miles up that many mountains. And what is the reasoning behind keeping the children separate from their parents that were missionaries?
Okay, the first one I'll look up and get you the answer for next time. Thank goodness for Google. Okay, I'm sure they weren't paid enough, because believe me, a lot of those porters slipped, went down, never to be heard from again. No question, it was that dangerous a trail. But mission schools, having said all of this, and we're going to get a little more personal next time. If I had been given the option of living up, my mother was a gifted teacher. She taught for 4 years, gifted teacher before she went to China. If I'd been given the option of being with my brother, being with a brother even, and living in Tibet, up on the border of Tibet, and having my mother homeschool me, or being in a mission school with 100 other kids my age in the Shangri-La of the world, I would have taken the latter. For me, in that regard, that doesn't totally answer your question, but the logic of the mission was it was just, I'm just going to say a boldly. The Bible says, my parents were literalists when it came to the Bible. And let me see if I can find it here. I might just, the Bible's pretty clear, about leaving, yea, in Matthew and Luke. Yea, if you are not willing to even forsake your children for the sake of the gospel, you are not worthy of the name of Jesus Christ. Now, if you're a biblical literalist, it is what it is, and there's something else I might just sort of say. You've listened to my conversation. My mother also knew the Bible's, the Apostle Paul says, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands with fear and trembling, as unto the Lord. It's there. I mean, it's just there. So you have the biblical mandate. You got people who take every bit of the Bible literally. What it says. It's not only valid for that culture, it's valid for 20th century America. Just read it. If that's your perspective, you got to, which obviously is mine. We'll get into that next time. But let me just, okay, when the mission left China, they tried to go to Cameron Highlands. That was an attempt to set up a mission school, and it just, people in Japan and the Philippines, that they were getting to a point where they said, no, I'm not gonna do that. So the mission lost a lot of competent missionaries because they said, we're not going to go to the China mission because of your policy on raising children. And in the book, I could read it. My father was the assistant director of the mission for a year, and he wrote it in defense of our policy. And so if you be the first, it's in this book. And my dad tried to defend the policy as best he could. But the mission decided, in the Reformed Church in India, he went to, help me out again, Cody Canal. Did you go to Cody? No. Okay. Anyway, Cody Canal, you went through high school. Our mission decided that better to get you back into your passport country. So they set up these hostels all over England and Australia, one in New Zealand, two in America, one in Canada. And we went and lived in these hostels when you turned about 10. And so then you went to junior high school and high school. And then that was the policy of the China Inland Mission. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a little bit about that. And we'll get into more of the after effects of that next time.
Oh, I'm wondering if the primary purpose of your family being there was to evangelize, and what kind of success did you have with that? Or was it strictly education?
Oh, strictly evangelization. That
Okay.
was the heathen were destined to hell. And it was my dad was he was a religious zealot. He was there to convert them from idolatry and from the worship of Tibetan Buddhism or Lamaism to understanding the cause of the nature of Jesus Christ. Tough assignment, because when Dad would go there, in contrast, I think, Boyd, to Buddhism, in Lamaism, oh, sure, you got another God, we'll put that God up. You got a idol form, I'll put up on the mantle along with the other gods. And so it was a challenge for my father, to sort of say, no, I'm talking about the one true God. So
So he had lots of success in that? You think?
no, I think if my answer would be, it was a tough road to hoe. In Taiwan, I'm skipping entirely the 20 years they spent as missionaries in Taiwan. That was a different story. But in Tibet, yes, not a lot of success, in my opinion, from what I've been able to discern. Yeah.
George, in 1958, when I was 8, I was in Sunday school, one class, and we had a missionary, I think from China, who came back and said in his or her, and I didn't remember if it was a male or female, in his or her entire life, they had seen one conversion to Christianity. And I remember thinking as an 8-year-old, oh, this is a wasted cause. Why are these people doing that?
Yeah.
And then I believe, like today, aren't there more Christians in China than there are in the United States?
The church in China, yeah.
Yeah, and the persecuted church seems to thrive,
There you go. I mean, isn't that something, with persecution seem to be, the church in China. Well, I'm sure Boyd could talk about it too more than I, but the church in China is interesting. Certainly the communist government monitors it pretty closely, and it's monitored more closely in some parts of China than others. But there are seminaries that train ministers under strict rules and guidelines. They can be a pastor. I'll show you. When we were in China, the largest church in Shanghai had been shut since Mao took over. You see, the communists declared the People's Republic of China in October 1 of 49. It had been shut down, and it just opened in 2012. And the pastor was so excited. So the church in China is an interesting one. But your comment, that's very true. Under the persecution, things seem to blossom and change. Yeah.
Your picture of the plight of the missionary children is so moving. And when you think about the fact that in 1949, when the American missionaries were kicked out of China wholesale, kind of at one time, right? In 1949, 50,
Right.
right in there.
My family left in
That
August.
those 5,000 American missionaries would have had at least 15,000 children, wouldn't they? Normally they were married and were having families.
Yeah.
And it's just thousands of children we're talking about in Amoy, where most of the Reformed
Yeah,
Church,
yeah.
missionaries were in Amoy. The Reformed Church sent about 50 missionaries to Amoy, and you'd be surprised how many of them were connected to Holland, Michigan, just and so they were able to work together more. So the DeVelger family, which I'm part of,
Sure.
had 4 children, and they would do anything they could to avoid sending the children far away at a young age. It just wasn't the American way. But here you had the English pattern
British one,
of
yeah.
wealthy English sending their 8-year-olds away to private schools. It was the way things were.
Yeah.
But the American missionaries, if they had other missionaries with them, so Harriet homeschooled John for several years. And later he went to a local school that was like a mission school, but it wasn't far away from his parents. And then he went to King George V High School in Hong Kong. So by the time they had left mainland China, they too went over the hump on a C-47, but they did that in 1944
44.
as Harriet was 8 months pregnant with John, and he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
born in India. You
Yeah.
know, it was just unbelievable.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then when they were ready to travel with the children, Harriet came home and Wally went back to China because, like your father, he could hardly wait to get back to where he had been.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, so true.
felt, but if the missionaries were in a group or had coordinated with the English Presbyterians and and one other denomination, the three denominations together were kind of managing the area around Amoy. And many of the American denominations kind of split China up. I think the Baptists were doing whole Shanghai region and the
Yeah, yeah.
Reformed and Presbyterian, blah, 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 so that they could take care of the families and solve some of these terrible problems.
Yeah.
But many missionaries ended up leaving their children with relatives back in the United States.
Yeah, like I said, this is a thoroughly British school system, 100% British missionaries until the turn of the 19th century. And then Dwight L. Moody invited Hudson Taylor to come to Chicago. And as a result of that meeting with Dwight L. Moody, 19 Americans went to China as missionaries, and that's sort of opened up. So until that time, it was, like you said, the British model.
Amazing.
Hudson Taylor sent his 4 children before the school was established in Jifu back. On the way back, one of his children died, and his wife was not in good health, and that just was too much for her, and she passed away as a result of having to do that. So Hudson Taylor said, we've got to come up with another solution. We can't be sending our kids back to England. And then, that's when he started the Jifu schools.
Right. And then your comment that you were just placed in first grade because you were obviously, ready for first grade. I think missionaries always thought their kids were so smart that they should skip grades. And so many missionary children skipped grades.
I missed a few. On my way back to my parents left China in August of 51. So we were under communism for 2 years.
Yeah.
And the mission, for some strange reason, decided my brother and I could try to make one last trip up to Tibet in the Christmas of 1950. Why in the world? So here we're heading back to Tibet. My brother and I, with another group of kids whose parents were in Jifu, where I was born. We got as far as Jifu, and he said, that's utterly no way that you're going to go back up to Tibet. In Tibet, banditry is a legitimized profession. So you take your chances on the China Tea Trail. And so it was just crazy. Yeah.
First of all, for every rule, there's an exception. So if you believe that missionary children are extraordinarily academically talented, I'm the exception. But I can't wait to hear your story next week, George.
Okay.
Thank you, because I'm a generation after you as an MK. It'll be very interesting to just see how
things have changed.
my experience as an MK was so different than yours.
Yeah.
But to your point about success, and I wonder, I'm going to close with this and segue you. What's that?
It wasn't all that different. There are
No.
things that I can.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I wonder how much of it is cultural as well. Tibet, my dad for the first 9 years in Japan was what they call a pioneer evangelist. Preached in a little church in a Japanese village. In those 9 years, he had 7 converts / baptisms. By any standard of success, that wasn't it. So I just wonder if because in large measure, the Oriental culture is so different than our Western culture, if there's just almost a built-in resistance.
I've got to, are you allowed to give homework assignments and ask Judy? Is that permissible? Anyway, I segue into next time. Think back in your life. When was the very first time that you heard some God talk? Okay. How old were you? And what was it? And how did you react to the God talk? And then as you got older and you tried to process it, and then junior high school, and college, and for some of us, graduate school or whatever, wherever you and through your life. I'll just quickly share my family so you can get you thinking about it. My sister, brilliant, just absolutely, kind of a photographic memory. And she graduated high school when she was 16 and did very well professionally in this country. But she bolted the Christian faith the second she got out of the mission home. Couldn't wait to get out. God had told my mother that all of her children would graduate from Wheaton College. Well, we batted 2 out of 3. My brother and I graduated from Wheaton. My sister did not graduate from Wheaton. She went to the University of Illinois. So who failed in that one, I'm not quite sure. My brother, it's interesting. He was a professor at the University of Colorado, Boulder, for his entire life, a high-powered research institution. But he had a couple of Danforths, and he was gone from teaching. You could never get away with this boy at Hope. I think he was gone from Boulder as much as he was there. Graduate assistants would teach the classes, and he'd be doing something else. But anyway, he took a year's leave of absence in 1999 to be a missionary with the Lutheran Church in Africa and in Iringa, Tanzania. But about 15 years ago, as he was weighing the balances of Christianity and the pluses and the minuses, he decided that the negative baggage in Christianity far outweighed the positive, and he's bolted the church. He hasn't darkened the door of a church in 15 years. For me, I could go on I'll talk a little bit about this next time, but you can summarize it in 6 words: from extreme fundamentalism to avowed universalism. That's the six words that will describe the alpha and the omega of my spiritual journey. So we'll get into that. And so your homework assignment is, what about that with you? As you look at where is your spiritual journey gone for you? As you've progressed through. And then maybe there could be a second homework assignment. What have been the drivers in your life? What's driven you? What drives you? What drove you to get up in the morning? What drives you to get up in the morning now? What is it really that drives you? And I remember when I was writing my book, it took me about a minute to identify the 4 in my life. The 4 drivers have been religion, forced on me because I was a kid, and I'll share a bit more about that next time. Sport, obviously sport. Been into sport, coached football for 30 years, wrote a book on American football that did go back into paperback editions. So anyway, and then music. I married the right person. Robbie was the best decision I ever made in my life. So music has been big. And then, of course, I think for every missionary kid, travel. You just have travel in your blood. You want to travel. So we've traveled a lot. So what about the drivers for you? And I think we'll have enough time next time to extend this conversation so you can share a little bit about that a week from today.
Thank you, George.
Yep. Thank you. Yep.
Come back next week for more.
And I'll put that book, or Judy will put that book right on the shelf out there. First come, first serve. Well, it has to get processed or something. Okay. Next week. Okay.